Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Tapestry by Beth Duke, narrated by Amy Mcfadden. A feather's not a bird, the rain is not the sea, a stone is not a mountain, but a river runs through me. A Feather's Not a Bird by Roseanne Cash. 1. Sunnyvale, Texas. Gossip is the most valuable currency in a small town. It's the reason the elderly widow waits in her front yard for the mail carrier. It's why the hardware store clerk quits stocking a shelf and rushes to see his neighbor near the nuts and bolts bin. It causes 3 women to maneuver themselves around a shampoo bowl and listen while they await their turns at the hair salon. They're about to get paid. On this particular morning, Celia Harris was walking to her own mailbox when she received an early Christmas present. The glamorous Cara Lee Darling from the mansion located 2 miles, 1 massive antique black and gold European wrought iron gate, and half a universe away. Mrs. Darling was walking arm in arm with her bodyguard, smiling up at him and gesturing to a stand of oak trees. Celia noted her tight chestnut brown leather pants and mink-trimmed cream sweater, then glanced down at her own floral house dress thrown over a pilled wool turtleneck. She jumped into a pile of leaves behind the sycamore in the front yard, praying no snake was hiding there. Celia had been terrified of lurking serpents her entire 63 years on this earth. Mrs. Darling was as stunning as everybody said. She really did look like a movie star. Tall, dark-haired, and flashing a brilliant smile with teeth like perfectly matched pearls. She had a figure any 18-year-old would be praying to develop, though she had to be in her 30s. And those eyes, the sparkle in them was visible from here. Celia's jaw dropped when the 2 reached the trees, and Mrs. Darling leaned her head back to kiss the burly bodyguard, a local boy named Deacon Jones. Deke had been in Celia's Sunday school class when he was just a moon-eyed boy. She inhaled deeply, smelling the waxy crayons she'd loved those children with, right out of her own pocket. Now he was all moon-eyed at Mrs. Darling and cradling the back of her fancy Dallas hairdo with his hand all dug into it. "Darling, my foot," Celia thought. "That woman is a Jezebel, all pushed up against a tree making out like a teenaged hormone bomb." Celia shook her head, peeking around to see how long they'd have the audacity to carry on. Those leather pants wouldn't fare too well rubbing against 100-year-old oak bark. She hoped they'd catch on fire right there. Mr. Pete Darling was a transplant from some other state, but Southern and generally embraced by most of the county. He owned a pipeline company and employed Celia's husband as well as a cousin or 2. At least 1,000 people in Texas alone worked for him, no telling where all else. So Celia knew he was in the hospital, fighting for his very life this Tuesday morning. Nobody at the beauty shop was going to believe this. She wished she had her iPhone to try and get a picture. Mrs. Darling and Deke didn't kiss long enough to suit Celia. They must have been in a hurry and worried someone might see them, even way out in the country. Well, she sure had. When Celia peeked around again, Mrs. Darling was grinning straight at Celia and blowing an exaggerated kiss from Christian Dior lips to her outstretched palm, lowering her fingers like a laser to point precisely at Celia's pounding heart. 2. Eufaula, Alabama. I peered over my grandmother's narrow shoulders at her computer screen. She was scrolling through ancient Native American recipes that featured corn hand-ground with a mortar and pestle. Some future meal was probably going to be excessively crunchy, and I made a mental note to bring home emergency backup food. I kissed the top of her head and said, "I love you, Grammy," then hurried to pick up my keys and get out the door to work. "Have a good time, little one. I love you, too." My grandmother never called me anything but little one, though I'm a 21-year-old woman named Skye, who towers over her. It didn't matter that I was off to work a restaurant shift either. She was always going to wish me a good time. I paused on my way out to look at the kitchen countertop photo of my dad, Larry Smith. He had a beautiful grin and looked so handsome in his uniform, surrounded by small Afghani children. One of them got him killed a few weeks after smiling innocently for the camera, blown to pieces by a 6-year-old boy who led him to an IED by begging my father for help with some emergency. Of course, he obliged the kid he'd handed a chocolate bar the week before. I was a tiny girl when that happened, a world away. I touched the photo's brass frame for luck, the same as every time I left the house, silently promising him I would find his relatives. I knew they'd want to meet the daughter he left behind. I replayed last night's discussion in my head as I drove the leafy boulevard of historic Queen Anne Victorians and Greek Revival mansions that stood between our modest neighborhood and Eufaula's downtown. After years of avoiding the subject, I dared to ask about my father's family again. "Skye," Mama had said, "I don't know how to find them, honey. We've been over this 1,000 times." She'd run her hands through her hair, the way she did when she was on the verge of tears. Grammy had chimed in, "Your father and mother were very much in love and spent every minute they could together when he was stationed at Fort Benning. He asked her to marry him just a few months after they met. They would have been married when he came home from his tour. You know that." She paused to look at my dad's photo, which loomed much larger in that kitchen than seemed possible for any 8x10 picture. "But we never met his family. We don't even know their names." She looked at my mother, clearly worried about the pain the subject caused her. "And Larry made it clear they wouldn't approve of him just showing up with a wife and child. He was planning to tell them eventually, but never got the chance." I'd leaned toward Grammy with my palms up, exasperated. "But surely he had friends who could have told Mama who they were." "No," my mother said, a little too loudly. "No one was ever able to tell me anything beyond the fact they lived up north. Larry wasn't close to his family, and he barely talked about them to anyone. And since we weren't married, the Army wouldn't release any information to me. I'm sorry, Skye." She shrugged. "All I know is what I've told you. There were a lot of military men in his background. Like, his great-great-grandfather was killed in World War I. He was a British soldier. Larry's great-great-grandmother and his great-great-grandparents on the other side all came to New England to join relatives sometime after that. I only remember it because he joked that his ancestors fought against the colonists in the American Revolution, and they were so bitter it took them a long time to let go and immigrate." "British, Mama? If you ever told me that, I must have been too young to remember. No wonder I love Wuthering Heights and the Pillars of the Earth so much. You don't know where in Britain they came from, do you?" I cocked my head to one side, hoping she'd keep going. This was the most she'd ever said about my father and his family. "I have no idea, Skye." Mama bit her lower lip. "Then please, Mama, just tell me about him. His favorite color, what he liked to eat, a movie he loved." My mother rubbed her eyes with her fingertips, then let her face fall into her palms for several seconds. She glanced up at me and stood to leave. "I'm sorry, Skye. I can't." Grammy watched her walk away from us, her worried eyes telling me to leave Mama in peace. "Little one," she whispered, "maybe someday. Even thinking about those memories is too hard, and she knows she'll go to pieces if she talks about them." I nodded. "But, Grammy, you knew him." "Not much, though, honey. Your mom knows all the things you asked. Maybe if you give her time, she'll open up." She patted my arm and moved to the couch, where we spent the rest of the evening in mutual silence, pretending to watch something on TV. My own high cheekbones and honey-colored skin were reflected in my grandmother's and mother's faces, but not my dark gray eyes. I needed to know where they came from, what my dad's people were like. I loved my grandmother and mother with all my heart. We had a wonderful home together, the three of us, but ours was so different from my friends' lives. There may have been divorces or separations, but at least they knew all about their dads and families, and theirs were far closer to normal than what I knew. My grandmother was convinced she was descended from the Alabama Muscogee Creek, based on her often admired cheekbones and the geography of her hometown. She knew Eufaula had once been Creek land. She'd heard some vague references to Indian ancestry when she was a child. She added all that up and reached the conclusion she was an authentic Native American. Her real name was Verna Willis, but she insisted on being called Sparrow. According to my mom, my long-deceased grandfather steadfastly refused to indulge her Indian nonsense and probably died from a curse rather than a heart attack. Sometimes Mama and I simply referred to her as the Sparrow. The Sparrow knew and loved the casinos owned and operated by the Porch Band of Creek Indians nearby, and it didn't hurt her feelings one bit to think she might partake of their profits someday if she could qualify as a member of their tribe. I was pondering all this as I parked my car and walked into the restaurant where I waited tables most evenings. An idea began to take hold, sidetracking my thoughts as I moved between dining room and kitchen all night. I could talk Grammy into ordering DNA test kits for the two of us, thereby clearly delineating what I inherited from my father's side and giving her an opportunity to prove her Native American background. It had been discussed, but my grandmother always put it off. Mama and I believed the Sparrow was afraid her chromosomes would let her down. She'd be devastated if she could never dance around the living room to her beloved Indian outlaw with the same frenetic joy again. Grammy felt a strong connection to that song and harbored an entirely inappropriate crush on Tim McGraw, too. I would convince her we could do it together, and it would be fun. I began mentally preparing my sales pitch for Grammy as I grabbed an order from the kitchen.
"Get back in here!"
Manny screamed.
"You forgot the queso dip for 7. What the hell, Skye?"
Manny was a Mexican tyrant chef who made a great many US dollars per year yelling a heavily accented "Skye" at me while I pushed half-price margaritas on tourists and prayed tequila touched their tipping hearts. Table 7 was an older couple, probably passing through town to admire the tourist row of stately homes. The wife was on her second margarita, and I could tell by her smile she was a 20%er, at least. "Is this restaurant a former bank?" the lady asked. "It looks like it." Her eyes tracked the fancy crown molding that edged the high ceiling. "No, ma'am, it was a jewelry store. You're sitting next to a display case." I waved at the glass door and shelf, once used for diamond necklaces and now holding a cheap Mexican pottery vase Manny hoped people would believe pre-Columbian. "Would you like another margarita? I know I'd love one." I chuckled conspiratorially, sure she'd say yes, though my baby face was inviting a lecture on underage drinking. Her husband offered me the empty chip basket, smiling at me, and then his slightly buzzy wife.
"Bring her another margarita, and I'd love some more chips and salsa to go with the queso dip, please."
"Yes, sir." I nodded and winked at Josefina Cuervo, who actually looked great for an ancient. My guess was 50, older than my mom, at least. She probably had a talented plastic surgeon. These two had a Jaguar parked out front. Manny stood at the kitchen entrance, arms crossed, surveying his kingdom. Most of the bright red vinyl booths were empty, but it was only 5:30. "Cheer up," I told him. "You know this town loves your cooking and your cheap margaritas more. Wait until dinner time before you get all depressed. Besides," I added, "Mama will be here at 6. My mother paid no attention whatsoever to Manny or any other men. No one could compete with the memory of my dad. Manny allowed himself a small grin at the thought of my mother, the woman he'd worshipped from afar for the 8 months she'd waitressed part-time with me. Most of the time he wore a look so devoid of expression that people assumed he was angry by default, a classic case of resting bitch face. Mama thought he looked like a younger George Lopez, who was on some sitcom she used to watch. He nodded at my pitiful cluster of customers.
"This week has been bad, though. Maybe we have to close."
Manny said this once a week. He never meant it. I rolled my eyes and headed to pick up the muy importante magic margarita tip potion, which eventually led the kind gentleman at table 7 to leave $30 cash for me. Happy wife, happy life. I took my cigarette break after Mama showed up, sitting on a chair behind the restaurant with our neighborhood beggar dog, Rusty, according to his tag. There was nothing rusty about him. He was some kind of Australian shepherd mix with a scruffy black and white coat. He made the appetizer rounds every evening. I'm betting old Rusty went home looking starved but stuffed with everything from stale bread to zucchini from the vegetarian place down the road. I slipped him a little steak I'd picked up on the way out. He licked my hand and trotted off toward Burger King. One more satisfied customer. I answered a text from Jeff, my on-off high school boyfriend who'd gone to Auburn to study accounting. He was going to try to get home this weekend. How hard could it be to drive an hour? There is no try, I shot back, softening it with a heart emoji. You should be here with me, Skye. Not this again. Jeff knew I had no desire to go to college. I hated the classroom in high school and the entire semester I'd spent at community college. I was much happier with my nose in a book, learning on my own. I didn't need or want a degree, and definitely not the debt I'd rack up getting one. I was preparing a brief texture in response, Jeff's term for my periodic text lectures, when Manny screamed, "Skye!" It sounded like Skye. I crunched out my Marlboro and went to see how busy Mama was. I'd take over tables as needed. What's up, Manny? I washed my hands clean of rusty drool and cigarette smell, bad for tips, then took a look at the dining room. Mama was juggling several booths, and Manny was trying to cook and watch Mama at the same time. Poor man was going to slice his finger off someday if Lisa Willis didn't pay him some attention. 3. Dallas, Texas. Kara sat at her husband's side, clasping his hand and willing him to wake up. The stroke's full effects were unknown, and Pete's doctors had kept him in a medically induced coma for days to prevent further damage from brain swelling. Today was the day he was to come back to consciousness. On the other side of the room sat Gerald Davidson, acting CEO and a major shareholder of PFD Pipelines Incorporated, Pete's company. Gerald was a solid-looking man of 40, graying slightly at his temples. His dark blue eyes were lined by years of warm smiles. He was the consummate charming businessman, Pete's trusted friend and confidant. Gerald was, by his own admission, the best damn lawyer in the state of Texas. He handled Pete's legal matters, and that was all the best damning he needed to do. Kara knew he could strike like a viper when it suited him. She was never sure where she stood with Gerald, since it was he who helped Pete construct the ironclad prenup that insisted their marriage had to last 10 years for her to be entitled to marital assets in a divorce or in the event of his death. Gerald had argued for 20 years and lost to Kara's hands on Pete's shoulders, massaging them gently in the conference room. Pete's company was premarital property, and Kara wouldn't see her chunk of the pipeline empire without that 10 years. She'd earned every penny already as far as she was concerned, standing at Pete's side during press conferences after one of his pipelines blew up in New Mexico, and the whole damn world watched it on an endless CNN loop. She'd endured the protesters waving signs about PFD killing children. She'd sat through 3 years of court proceedings that somehow, miraculously, left most of the company intact. Her husband was a large, balding, introverted, boring, business-obsessed man. But he was all hers. Kara had managed to change Pete's mind about a lot of things, like the ridiculous female bodyguards he'd originally hired to protect her. She'd also talked him into leaving the Tornado Target ranch he adored in Oklahoma, furnished in early antler, and building a home more suited to her taste near Dallas. They'd celebrated their 6th anniversary in Italy in July. Kara wished she'd kept Pete from eating his way through Tuscany to Sicily like a rampaging Hun. She had at least 400 million reasons to love and support her husband. Kara lifted his hand to her lips and whispered, "Pete, please wake up. It's me, baby. It's your Kara." Pete didn't blink or raise a finger. Kara wiped a tear from her cheek and glanced at Gerald, who was watching her like he always did, with a healthy mix of lust and distrust. She knew how to address that, at least. She stood and tugged her black knit dress into place, making sure the tiny gold chain belt was hanging across her flat lower belly and above her hard-earned round butt cheeks. Kara walked to Gerald like he was the only man in the world, her deep brown eyes sparkling and locked on his, her hips moving like precision weapons. She took his hand in hers and said, "I know you must be tired. I'm getting you a coffee and something sweet. Call me if he moves a muscle, Gerald, okay?" He nodded mutely. She turned to be sure he'd have the maximum time to watch her walk away, and, as always, she did it like she'd just thrown a match over her shoulder onto a pile of gasoline-soaked trash.
"She's gone, Pete,"
Gerald said as the door closed. Pete Darling opened his weary eyes and blinked.
"And I can't keep the nurses quiet much longer. You're going to have to let Kara know you're awake."
Pete whispered, "I want to hear what she asks you, Jerry, thinking I'm off in La-La Land." He closed his eyes and exhaled. "She's the most beautiful woman in the world. Most of the time
you're scared to death of her, Pete,"
Gerald finished. "I love her, Jerry. We both know she can be a little flirtatious, but that's because men stare everywhere she goes. Kara can't help the effect her beauty has. I guess I'm still insecure, worrying over nothing."
"Well, you're going to have to let her see you're okay, Pete. You can't wallow in this bed pretending to sleep, spying like the Law and Order Special Betrayal Unit. They brought you around 6 hours ago, and it shows, buddy. Plus, they're going to haul you off to physical therapy tomorrow and get that left side working."
Pete grimaced. "I don't know what's worse, worrying about my wife wanting to bust our prenup, or Brunhilde coming to kidnap me at 7 tomorrow morning." Gerald laughed.
"Her name is Denise, and she's a pretty young thing. Just kind of muscular, that's all."
Kara Lee Evans Darling moved through hallways and sidewalks with crowds parting like a Ferrari was driving through. Men gaped, and women did too, until they turned to smack their husbands' arms. She sailed past a nurse's station and smiled a young intern into bumping the desk counter and fumbling his iPad. Deke was waiting where she'd stationed him, on a couch in the main lobby. He threw down a dated copy of Guns and Ammo, following her into the stairwell.
"How is he?"
He cocked his head like a confused puppy, unsure whether to display loyalty to his master or his mistress. "Poor Deke," she thought. "I may have broken him." Kara dragged a long red fingernail down his chest, stopping just above his belt. Then she stepped back and said, "Mr. Darling will wake up any time now, and I'll be by his side. You go to the office and wait to see if he needs anything there. Understand?"
"Mr. Darling."
Deke swallowed the urge to say anything more, along with his pride.
"Yes, ma'am."
He opened the door for Kara and watched her saunter off to the cafeteria. 4. Eufaula, Alabama. Mama and I found my grandmother wearing a fringed fake suede shirt and matching ankle-length skirt, stirring something suspicious on the stove. It was 9:30 p.m. and at least 80 degrees outside. "Mom, really?" Mama turned her face to the ceiling. Maybe she was begging the ancestors for patience. "I got it from the eBay, Talisa." Grammy whirled a few times to show off the skirt's flare, waving her wooden spoon. She blew me a kiss and said, "Hisjay, little one." It sounded like Hisjay, and I knew it meant hello because I'd helped her find the Creek Language and Traditions website.
It looks like a Halloween costume. Mama was shuffling through the day's mail. She threw it all into the garbage can under the sink. I'm afraid to ask what you're cooking. I am cooking a cornmeal soup, and it's going to taste great, Grammy replied. It has to sit for a few days to sour, and it's called sofki. Uh-huh, Mama said. And are we supposed to eat this for supper in a few days? She was leaning on the back of a kitchen chair, tired but pretty. Her hair was long like Grammy's, but brown instead of snow white. I thought Grammy Sparrow's hair was amazing. She wore it in a braid that met her waist, and when she brushed it at night, it was soft as kittens. Can if you want to. It's mostly to put in a bowl by the front door to welcome visitors. Grammy had gone back to furious stirring. Mama shot me a look. Mom, you're going to have to stay off that website. This is getting crazy. Even the purest Creek Indian doesn't make some weird sour glue soup for visitors in 2018. Besides, what visitors? Maybe that Mexican Lothario of yours, Talisa. Grammy chuckled. You should invite him over. He is not interested in me, and your soup would scare him back to Juarez. It's less frightening than fermented cornmeal slush. My mother glared at me, since I'd obviously told Grammy too much about Manny's crush on her. What's so scary about Juarez? I asked. Nothing now, I guess, but it was the murder capital of the world 10 years ago. Manny said he has nightmares about the drug cartels. You sure have learned a lot about Manny, I told her, and immediately regretted it. Mama announced she was going to bed, tired of the two of us ganging up on her. She took her purse and phone, heading off to her room at the end of the hall. Grammy muttered, That one is stubborn. Won't even use the name I gave her. I think Talisa is a pretty name too, but if Mama wants to call herself Lisa, you should understand that, Grammy. Especially since you only added the "ta" when you read it in a book after she'd been Lisa until 3rd grade. It means beautiful waters in Muscogee Creek, and she's an Aquarius. I laughed at her, and she laughed back. Let's stick to one realm at a time, okay? I said. Deal. Grammy turned the stove off. I could smell corn and something vaguely like dill pickles. Why can't you cook more Alabamian food, like chicken and dressing or potato salad? I asked her, but made sure she saw I was smiling when I said it. Little one, this soup was Alabamian before the chicken and dressing people came. Our people were Alabama. We are Alabama. Chicken and dressing people, huh? Grammy, you used to work full-time at Walmart and ride a Harley. Do you remember that? She nodded. I remember that, and all the generations that came before me. I remember my great-great-great-great-grandfather, who was a chief, and his daughter was a princess. All this started 2 years ago, when you went to that casino. I raised my eyebrows as high as they'd go. Now you remember these ancestors? It is a gift, she answered, pouring the glop into some ceramic pot she'd painted with bright yellow stalks of corn. She placed the pot on an old bedside table she'd dragged out of the garage and put by the door. Someday you will understand we are not whole until we know the ones who walked before us. They beat in our hearts and feel with our fingertips. We are the result of all who loved us into being, little one. Do any of my ancestors know how to make decent mac and cheese through your fingertips? Grammy laughed. Tomorrow is Saturday. I'll bake some chicken and dressing, too. Mut-oh. I hugged her tightly as the smile dawned on her face. That's right, mut-oh, Grammy. I can visit a website, too. Only I don't know how to say you're welcome, she fretted. We'll find out, I said. I looked down the hallway to make sure Mama was still in her room. Grammy, I know how important your Creek ancestry is to you, and you know how important it is to me to find out more about who I am.
Let's finally do something about it and order the DNA kits we've talked about. You're going to have to be brave to do it, but you can confirm your native...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?